Hey guys, it's Multiplier. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a fun way you can add some human variation in Ableton. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on some hi-hats played at 16th divisions, but this same general philosophy, the same approach can be applied to anything. So while we are looking at one particular example using drums and MIDI, the same ideas can be applied to literally anything throughout your entire track. So what we've got is some simple hi-hats playing through, which sound really straight, really robotic. But what we want to do is we want to add a little bit of change. But the key thing here is we want to add a little bit of subtle change that will make it sound a bit more human-y, a bit more alive, a bit more real, and fundamentally as well, a bit more dancey. So what we've done is we've mapped one of the macro knobs in this drum rack to a few parameters, and then we've defined the upper and lower limits. So as we move this macro knob through, either with a mouse or in my case with a MIDI controller, we can move it around and create a little bit of variation in a nice organic way. So it's definitely subtle, but that's the key to this. We don't want it to be too drastic, too wild. We still want them to sound like 16th division hi-hats played after each other, but we just want a little bit of variation to make it sound a little bit more interesting and a little bit more real. So how have we done this? So let's recreate this. So we'll drag out the same drum rack, which is just one of the built-in Ableton drum racks. I think it might only be in the suite version of Ableton, but there you go. And what we'll do, insert a MIDI clip, and we'll just copy across the same MIDI notes from the one we've just made. So HH bounce 2. Cool. So now we have the basis of what we want. We need to program in this cool change. So to do that, we've already got everything set up with macro knobs. If we'd had this simpler instrument by itself, not grouped as a drum rack, so for example, what we could have done is had this simpler by itself, just as a simpler instrument, we have to first of all group it so we have the macro knobs available. So to do that, just right click group, and then you get the settings on the side that we want. But in this case, because it's already a drum rack, we already have that set up. And then we can actually see those macro knobs by hitting this button here. Cool. So what we need to do is map a few parameters to, say, macro 1, and yeah, then define the upper and lower limits. So let's just do 1 as an example, first of all. So we'll map the volume. We could map anything we like, but I think the volume might be quite a nice one to start with. So we'll right click. First of all, let's make sure we have the right actual drum thing selected. So what we'll do is play it through. Check to see which play light is lighting. So we see that one is, so we know it's going to be this one. Make sure that's selected. I know it's an easy mistake to make to, say, have this one playing, but then have another drum slot selected, and then you end up mapping things for a drum slot that's not actually doing anything. So just make sure we're on the right drum slot. And then we'll right-click the volume, map to macro 1. And now we can see we've got the volume. We can confirm this as we move the macro knob around. We can see on the volume bit, it's actually changing. So we can move this around with our mouse here, or if we have something like an Ableton push, it comes mapped as standard to the 8 macro knobs just by selecting it. Or if we have another MIDI device, we might have to map a knob or a fader on that MIDI device to this macro 1 here. Or we can use a mouse, either way is good. So what we need to do, notice how at the moment it goes from minus 36 dB right through to 36 dB, which is way too high. Because we only want a few dB of change to add that subtle variation, we need to change the limits. So we'll hit map, and then change the limits up here. So I'm thinking something like minus 14 to minus 12 might be fine. Just literally 2 dB or so of change. And there you go, we have a little bit of volume change, which, yeah, definitely subtlety is the key with this, but I think that sounds quite cool. So let's map a few more things. So let's also map the low pass filter, which is the standard filter, on a simpler. So we'll hit the filter here. If you need a reminder of what that sounds like, if we play it through. So we want to map this, the frequency cutoff position. Probably only just of the last little bit. So we'll right click and map to volume, and then we'll change the limits again. So hop into mapping mode and then change the limits. Something like That should be good. Let's test it out. Cool stuff. And let's map 2 more, just like we did in the previous one. So what we're going to map is we're going to map the detune, which pitches it up or down very slightly. So we're going to map that to the same macro one. In fact, let's rename it so we don't forget. Right click, rename, twist me, or something fun. And then we'll map detune, map to twist me. And then while we're here, let's also map this random parameter here. This is quite a cool one. It's basically the clue to what this randomizes. Obviously, it says rand, so it's going to randomize something. The clue to what it randomizes is where it is. So we see the way it's all zoned off in simpler. We've got the pan position here. So this basically randomizes the pan position. So in fact, let's play that through to demonstrate. It's quite a cool thing that not many people know about. Pretty cool, right? So especially if you just want a little bit of subtle movement that's, again, random, just have it down to like a few percent or so. It sounds pretty cool, I think. And so let's map this random parameter here to that same macro so we can play around with that. So map to twist me. And then just like before, we need to hop into mapping mode to set the upper and lower limits for those 2 other parameters we've mapped, which was the detune and the random. So map. We will go to detune and we'll change it to, say, literally just 2 centitones up and down should be sufficient. Something like that. So it's just going to pitch it up very slightly up and down, almost like how analog gear, the pitch wobbles around and moves a little bit by itself. Sounds quite cool. And then for the random, again, we'll choose the limits, just something like 0 to 7%, just so it's quite subtle. Subtlety is always going to be the key here. And then we can test it out to make sure it's all working okay. So let's, in fact, give it a go. And there you go, pretty cool, right? Some other things you can map. So we've just used a drum as an example, some MIDI drums, but you can do this with literally anything. You could do it with an effect on a vocal or a synth. So you could do it on maybe the dry wet of a reverb or a ping pong delay, or you could do it on, it could be on literally anything you can imagine. You could even map it to parameters within plugins, pretty much anything that you feel is a little bit straight and you want to add a little bit of human variation to. What you want to do is simply group it up. So if you have a string of effects or an instrument, just right click them, group, so you can see these macro knobs. Map some of the parameters to a single macro knob and then just have a play around, either using a mouse or a MIDI controller. And then what you can do throughout the track is you can just record these automations in, these modulations, and then you have this nice human feel added to your track. And yeah, chances are people won't hear it, but that's almost the point. You shouldn't be able to necessarily, at least in most situations, I think, hear these human changes, but instead you more feel them on an emotional level. They just feel more alive. And yeah, I think it's quite cool. I've been Multiplier. Hope you enjoyed.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.